Let's get right into it. Today, in this explainer, we're taking a fresh look at a true classic, but we're looking at it through a very specific lens. You probably know Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich as a personal wealth manual, right? Well, when you really examine the source text, it's actually a deeply researched, indispensable playbook for modern executive leadership. It's a literal blueprint on how to build, organize, and lead massive enterprises, especially when you're navigating market volatility and serious corporate challenges.
So what actually separates a day-to-day manager from a true empire builder? That's the core question we have to ask. We're talking about that tough transition from just maintaining the status quo to forging a massive, visionary impact. Keep in mind, this text draws heavily on the real-world experiences of over 500 exceedingly successful men, literal titans of industry who started from absolutely nothing. It digs right into the exact difference between those who just manage operations and those who actually build lasting industrial empires.
Here is our executive playbook for today. We're covering 1. The executive mindset, 2. Power of the mastermind, 3. The new leadership, 4. Organized planning, 5. The persistence test, and 6. Overcoming executive alibis.
Starting off with Section 1, the executive mindset, from wish to vision.
It is so crucial to understand that the men analyzed in this text, guys like Henry Ford, didn't just start out with giant piles of capital. They started with an intangible impulse. They literally harnessed the unseen forces of unborn opportunity and converted them into factories, cities, and major corporations using nothing but thoughts, ideas, and strictly organized plans.
And this whole philosophy is anchored in real, undeniable historical success from giants like Andrew Carnegie and Thomas Edison. In fact, Carnegie actually tossed this secret to the author, pointing out that a lot of traditional schooling is pretty much useless when it comes to the real business of accumulating wealth and leading people. Carnegie used this exact formula to develop some incredibly rare leadership qualities in his own young executives. If you need proof of how universally applicable these principles are, just look at former U.S. President and Chief Justice William Howard Taft. He actually urged every leader to assimilate this philosophy, noting that it contains fine material that leaders in every walk of life should understand. So we're not just talking about abstract theory here, it's a rigorously tested framework endorsed at the absolute highest levels of government and industry.
Look, as an executive, just wishing for market dominance, that's not going to cut it. The text points out that every human being wishes for success, but wishing doesn't make it happen. You need a definite purpose backed by a burning desire that translates into a concrete, material obsession. You have to cultivate a state of mind that becomes an absolute obsession, followed by very definite ways and means to acquire it, and the sheer persistence to never recognize failure.
All right, let's move into Section 2, Power of the Mastermind, your inner circle.
Your strategic vision absolutely requires what Hill calls a mastermind group. This is how you multiply your brainpower and convert your plans into actual, tangible action. The text highlights that Andrew Carnegie attributed his entire fortune to his mastermind group, which was a staff of about 50 men he surrounded himself with specifically to manufacture and market steel. The takeaway? You simply have to surround yourself with men and women who can do all the things you cannot do.
Now, what I really want to emphasize here is the absolute insistence on perfect harmony. The source material is totally uncompromising about this. If you do not maintain perfect harmony between yourself and every single member of your executive team, you can expect to fail. The principle literally cannot work where corporate friction prevails or where siloed thinking fractures your inner circle. It's that simple.
Moving right along to Section 3, the new leadership, consent versus force.
The text was actually incredibly prophetic here. It calls out that leadership by force, basically dictatorship, just cannot endure, and that modern industry demands leadership by the consent and sympathy of the followers. It notes that leaders who rule by fear and force, think Napoleon or the Tsar of Russia, inevitably fall. In our modern corporate landscape, ruling by fear leads straight to massive turnover. The new brand of leadership requires cooperation, treating the employer-employee relationship almost like a partnership so you can actually retain your top talent. So how do you actually earn that consent? Well, you have to cultivate some very specific attributes. For starters, you cannot control others if you cannot control yourself. And if you waver in your decisions, you're showing a lack of self-confidence that intelligent followers simply won't respect for very long.
And here is the heavy burden of being an executive. You've got to plan flawlessly, assume total responsibility, and foster absolute cooperation.
If someone on your team makes a mistake or shows incompetence, the text says the leader must consider that it is he who failed. You literally have to be willing to do more than you require of your followers. It's tough, but it's essential.
That brings us to Section 4, Organized Planning, Crystallizing Desire.
As a leader, you've got to realize that experiencing a defeat just means your plans weren't sound yet. It just means it's time to rebuild and set sail again. The text gives this great example of Samuel Insull, who lost a fortune of over $100 million during the Depression. Why? Because the Depression forced him to change his plans, and his new plans just weren't sound. Defeat is nothing more than a feedback loop telling you to fix the strategy.
Which leads perfectly into Section 5, the persistence test, navigating defeat.
This requires a major mindset shift. You have to learn how to distinguish between a temporary defeat and a permanent failure. The text describes this idea of a hidden guide whose whole duty is to test leaders through all sorts of discouraging experiences. The ones who pick themselves up and keep trying, they pass the test. Those who can't take it, well, they simply don't make the grade.
I really want you to think about your own recent corporate setbacks for a second. Ask yourself honestly, are you quitting right before the breakthrough? The source material tells this famous story of a man who stopped drilling just 3 feet short of a massive gold vein. As an executive, you have to ask yourself if you're abandoning a perfectly sound strategy just because you hit a tough patch. Remember, a quitter never wins and a winner never quits.
Finally, we hit Section 6, Overcoming Executive Alibis, Self-Analysis.
This is where the text really challenges us with the 57 alibis by Old Man IF. It reminds us that leaders who fail almost always have airtight excuses, while true leaders just take accountability. It's totally human nature to defend your own alibis, mostly because you created them. But leaning on excuses like, if I only had more capital, or if my board would just listen, is a fatal habit. Real success requires no explanations, and failure permits no alibis.
To avoid that trap, you need to regularly audit your own performance using these exact hard-hitting questions to make sure you're actually leading from the front. The text advises taking a self-analysis test like this, frankly, and even having it checked by someone courageous enough to grade you accurately. You have to brutally, honestly assess your quality of work, your team harmony, and your decisiveness.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final provocative question. What exactly do you want your legacy to be? Figure that out and start building it today. Are you just floating on the broad sea of circumstance, or are you actively directing your thoughts, your mastermind group, and your organized plans toward an absolute, definite chief aim? The entire playbook is right here in front of you. The execution, though, that's completely up to you.